There is a silence that is louder than any sound. It is the silence of 120,000 men waiting in a ditch of mud and fear, their eyes fixed on their watches. It is the silence that hangs in the air just before the world ends. This is the story of the first day of the Battle of the Somme. A day not just of battle, but of a hope so profound, its shattering would echo for generations. By the summer of 1916, the Great War had become a nightmare of stagnation. On the Western Front, two vast armies were locked in a brutal embrace, buried in hundreds of miles of trenches that stretched from the coast of Belgium to the border of Switzerland. For nearly 2 years, a decisive victory had eluded everyone. The cost in lives was already unimaginable, and the ground between the opposing lines, no man's land, had become a desolate, corpse-strewn bog of wire and shell craters. Something had to change. The Allied High Command, a coalition of British and French forces, devised a plan, a grand offensive, a massive simultaneous assault along the River Somme in France that would, they believed, punch a hole in the German lines and end the deadlock. It would be the big push, the battle that would win the war. The man tasked with leading the British part of this offensive was Field Marshal Douglas Haig. He placed his faith in a simple, brutal formula: artillery. For 7 days and 7 nights, the British Army unleashed the most ferocious bombardment the world had ever seen. Over 1.5 million shells were fired at the German positions. The earth trembled for miles around. The sky was perpetually black with smoke and dirt. The soldiers in their jump-off trenches were told that nothing could possibly survive such an inferno. The barbed wire would be cut to pieces. The German machine gun nests would be pulverized. The enemy, shell-shocked and broken, would be utterly incapable of resistance. When the British Tommies went over the top, they were told they would simply need to walk across no man's land and occupy the vacant trenches. Many were even instructed to not run, but to advance in steady, orderly lines. But in the fog of war, assumption is a dangerous thing. The reality in the German trenches was far different. The German army had spent 2 years fortifying their positions. They had dug deep. Not just trenches, but elaborate bunkers, carved 30 feet into the chalky earth, shell-proof shelters where entire companies could wait out the storm above. When the bombardment finally lifted on the morning of July 1st, the German soldiers, dazed but very much alive, scrambled up their ladders. They manned their positions. They dusted off their machine guns, the dreaded Spandaus, and they looked out across no man's land. They saw not a scarred and empty wasteland, but a vast field of destruction, still littered with uncut wire, and they saw something else. Lines. Endless, slow-moving lines of men. At 7:28 a.m., a new sound cut through the unnatural silence. Not a shell, but the shrill blast of a mine explosion under a German strongpoint. It was the signal. 2 minutes later, along a 25-mile front, officers raised whistles to their lips. That sound was the starting pistol for the bloodiest day in the history of the British Army. Men, burdened with over 60 pounds of equipment, began to climb the scaling ladders out of the trenches. They moved slowly into the open, many walking shoulder to shoulder as instructed. For a few heartbeats, there was only the sound of their boots on the mud, a surreal, almost peaceful moment. And then, the silence broke. The German machine guns opened up. The walking lines of men offered the perfect target. They were mowed down in waves. Men fell by the dozen, by the hundred. The grand advance, the big push, had instantly become a massacre. No man's land became a killing field. The hope of a morning had evaporated by breakfast time, replaced by a horror the world was only beginning to comprehend. But this was only the beginning. The whistle had blown, and there was no turning back. The battle for the Somme had begun. Dawn on July 2nd, 1916. The sun rose on a world utterly transformed. The grand strategy was in ruins. The optimism of high command was now a bitter, poisonous memory. In the first 24 hours of the Battle of the Somme, the British Army had suffered 57,470 casualties. Nearly 20,000 of them were dead, their bodies littering the field between the trenches. It was a loss so catastrophic, so incomprehensible, that it would forever scar the soul of a nation. Yet he moves among them like a calm in the storm, directing fire, dragging wounded to cover, even manning a PIAT anti-tank launcher when a panzer lurches too close. "Hold the line," he shouts, voice hoarse but unyielding. "We stop them here, or the whole front cracks." For 3 days, the battle rages without pause. Currie Sherman's dual enemy armor at point-blank range, shells ricocheting off stone walls. His infantry repel wave after wave, their Bren guns glowing red-hot. By night, he organizes scavenging parties to strip ammunition from wrecked vehicles, while German prisoners, over 2,000 by the end, stagger in, hands raised, faces etched with exhaustion. Currie, sleepless, wounded again in the leg, refuses to yield. His leadership is a beacon. When a young gunner falters, he claps his shoulder and says, "Lad, we're writing history today. Make it count." By August 21st, the gap is sealed. The Falaise Pocket collapses, trapping nearly 50,000 Germans and shattering their army in Normandy. Currie's stand at Saint Lambert is a linchpin of the victory, saving countless Allied lives and hastening the liberation of Europe. For this, he is awarded the Victoria Cross, the only Canadian to earn it in the Normandy campaign, a testament to courage that burns brighter than the fires of war. David Vivian Currie returned to Moose Jaw, to Anne and his son, carrying the weight of those days in silence. He died in 1986, but his legacy endures. A mechanic turned hero who held the line when the world hung in the balance. If you've been moved by this story, join us at The Past Unfolded as we unearth more forgotten tales of valor. Until next time, keep history alive.